Flavor masks danger. Death served in disguise. Welcome to Wolfe's Casebook. I am your host, Mr. Enigma. Let me know where you're listening from. I read every note. Your comments make this case alive. Let's dive in. If you want to see Nero Wolfe move faster than continental drift, threaten three things in ascending order: his schedule, his orchids, or Fritz's pantry. On a muggy Wednesday that tried to pass for spring, all three got a nudge, and that's how the fatal flavor mystery walked into the brownstone and set out the place cards. It began with a knock that Fritz categorized afterward as impertinent. I was in the office, finishing the crossword and pretending to file, when he ushered in a woman whose hat had killed a small flock to make its point. She had high shoulders, a low voice, and the kind of composure that comes in a monogrammed case. "Agnes Vale," she said. "President, New York Epicurean Circle. If you've never heard of them, congratulations on having a healthy bank balance. They meet to prove taste buds can be pedigreed." Wolfe, who had just concluded lunch, lamb kidneys, buttered leeks, and a beer with opinions, did not stand. He rarely does. He closed his eyes to half-mast and let her get on with it. "Mr. Wolfe," she said, "this is urgent. I require your expertise regarding a spice." That got him one eyebrow. "A spice we will present at the Circle's Spring Gala, a recently rediscovered pepper called Pimenta Fatalis. The importer claims it's the lost monarch pepper favored in the 1890s by Berthold Warn, a culinary legend. Its flavor is remarkable. We are to unveil it Friday night in a sauce created by a guest chef. There's been a complication." "There always is," I said helpfully. She ignored me. "Last night, during a private preview, our culinary chair, Mr. Lennox Price, tasted a reduction made with the pepper and collapsed. Not dead. Not yet. He is in St. Timothy's under observation. The hospital suspects contamination. The importer is adamant it's pure. The chef swears the sauce was safe. The board is divided between panic and denial. We need someone unimpeachable to examine the pepper and the circumstances." Wolfe drifted a hand toward the air. "Madame, I am not a public assay office." "No," she said. "You are a fortress, and the Circle needs a fortress. We intend to proceed with the gala. Our donors are ungovernable, but not if a man died for a condiment." "He didn't," I said. "Yet." Her gloved fingers tightened on the handbag. "We must know whether the pepper is at fault, the preparation, or something worse." She made worse sound like tax evasion. "If I do not deliver certainty by Friday afternoon, I will preside over a scandal with more courses than our menu." Wolfe's eyelids came up another fraction. "Who is the importer?" "Rafik Haddad, Haddad and Sons, Harborfront Warehouses." "And the chef?" "Bruno Kell. He has 5 restaurants, 2 tempers, and 1 god, himself." "Your culinary chair, Mr. Price, has enemies." "Everyone with a kitchen," she said crisply. "He makes his reputation by ruining others. But he is valuable to the Circle, and he was my friend." Wolfe let that sit, then swiveled his head toward me. "Archie." "I'm hearing you," I said, and was ready to decline politely for him when the real complication arrived. It came in the form of Fritz, who reappeared with his ears pink. He was carrying a small blue glass jar sealed with wax and secured by string like a proposition from the 19th century. The jar was set on a silver tray as if it might bite. "Mr. Wolfe," he said, "this was left on the back stoop. No bell, no card, only this." He held out a folded scrap. I took it, and Wolfe flicked a finger to signal read. The note was printed blocky, the kind of hand that believes in anonymity and cheap paper. "For your palate, not your police. The flavor is fatal because someone made it so. Don't let them feed it to a city." Underneath, a doodled crown. Wolfe's eyes opened all the way. Fritz looked personally insulted by the jar, which on inspection held something reddish-brown that clung to the glass in a sullen ring. It smelled, yes, I cracked the wax, like sunlight had been condensed and bribed to behave. Bright, grassy, with a back-of-the-throat prickle that promised fireworks and alimony. Agnes Vale swallowed. That is the color, and the crown, monarch pepper. Someone is playing a game. Not in my house, Fritz said, which in Fritz was a battle cry. Wolfe pointed. Replace the seal, Archie. I did. He turned to Agnes. Madame, you assert this pepper is to be unveiled Friday, that a man collapsed after tasting it yesterday, and that you were ignorant of my impending involvement until this moment. Yet an anonymous benefactor deposits a jar at my door, courting my interference. That suggests either conspiracy or foresight. I dislike both. She drew a breath. I implore you. I am not for hire to prevent donors from embarrassing themselves, Wolfe said. I am for hire to defend the sanctity of my home and my chef. And now, his gaze moved to Fritz, my pantry has been implicated by proximity. Fritz said, it has been trespassed in spirit. Just so. Wolfe shifted his bulk. Very well. Archie, the names. I took them down as she supplied them, adding my own footnotes as I'm paid to do. Agnes Vale, the president who needed a miracle and a lid for her pot. Lennox Price, critic on a hospital pillow with tubes and grudges. Bruno Kell, genius with knives and no brakes. Rafik Haddad, importer with a family crest and a warehouse key. Vera Delaney, society hostess lending her mansion for the gala and her guest list for purgatory. And a sous chef named Mila Petrov, quiet as steam, who had plated the reduction under Kell's direction. And a rival, Wolfe asked mildly. There is always a rival when a crown is minted. Agnes's hat bristled. Clive Dawn, he insists the monarch story is fiction and that his own sourcing, Guianan chilies, smoked, will eclipse it. He threatened to upstage us with a surprise course at Vera's gala if we refused him a slot. Threaten the program, I said, and eat the cake too. Charming. Wolfe closed his eyes. It will suffice. Agnes leaned forward. So you will. I will allow Mr. Goodwin to attend your gala preparations and your importer's premises, Wolfe said. He will observe, question, and report. I shall not go herring about. You may consider yourself fortunate. I shall also keep this jar, which has violated my stoop and therefore falls under my jurisdiction. She exhaled something like relief and stood. I will send credentials. And, Mr. Wolfe, thank you, he grunted, which from Wolfe is both receipt and dismissal. Fritz escorted her out with the dignity of a court chamberlain who has just survived barbarian envoys. When the door closed, Wolfe looked at the blue glass jar, then at me. 2 things, he said. First, that note. Second, the crown. Someone is dramatizing. I detest dramatists who choose my stage. And third, I said because I can count, Price didn't die. Yet. Do not be crude, Wolfe said. If the pepper is contaminated, the importer is a fool or a knave. If the sauce was adulterated, the chef is vain or complicit. If neither, the circle breeds vipers. In every case, my peace is disturbed. Fritz cleared his throat. Mr. Wolfe, should I dispose? You will do nothing, Wolfe said. No one tastes that until I instruct it. I slipped the note into an envelope. The little crown smiled its cheap smile. You want Saul on the warehouse? Yes, he said. And you on Bruno Kell and his kitchen. Begin with the sous chef. Quiet people leave fewer lies and more footprints. Vera Delaney's mansion? I asked. In due course, he said. The thing will play out in rooms with chandeliers. For now, the heat is in the pot. Clever, I said. You taking this because of the city's welfare, our client's distress, or the insult to your stoop? The last, he said promptly, and reached for his beer. Archie, Yes, sir. Find the hand that wrote that crown. It is either a warning or an invitation. In either case, I must know who presumes to address me from my back steps. That was the hook. A jar with a sunny sting, a critic down, a circle of epicures tugging at their collars, and a crown sketched by a coward. I pocketed the envelope, squared my hat, and headed for Bruno Kell's flagship, where sous chefs move like ghosts and the maître d' thinks a smile is a proprietary ingredient. Behind me, Wolfe settled deeper into his chair, which is how he hunts. If you're new to us, here's the arrangement. He thinks I run, and sooner or later the universe trips over its own theatrics and lands on our carpet. It never apologizes. Wolfe never asks it to. He just reaches for the right word, the right pressure point, and the right moment to push. On the way out, I glanced at Fritz, who was glaring at the sealed jar like it had tracked mud on his clean floor. Don't worry, I told him. If this monarch pepper turns out to be the king of something, we'll find which kingdom. And who poisoned the throne? Ugh, he said, which in Fritz is a treaty, a benediction, and a threat. Bring back facts, Mr. Goodwin. Always, I said, and opened the door to a city that makes more flavors than sense. When it comes to chefs with reputations, Bruno Kell was somewhere between maestro and menace. His flagship place on East 63rd had a waiting list longer than Wolfe's patience, and that's saying plenty. Walking into Kell's kitchen was like stepping into a small republic where he was both president and firing squad. Sous chefs, line cooks, and dishwashers all moved with the precision of men and women who knew a scowl could cost them their station. I threaded my way through, flashing the credentials Agnes Vale had couriered over. They got me past the maître d', who looked at me like I was a stain on his pressed cuffs, and into the steel and tile theater of heat and knives. Kell spotted me before I had a chance to adjust my tie. He was a tall man, rail-thin but coiled, with hair he hadn't decided whether to tame or weaponize. His eyes snapped like the burners, and the rolling French accent was more for intimidation than communication. You are Goodwin, from Nero Wolfe. Agnes tells me you will poke around. Observation, I said mildly. Less poking, more watching. Though if something happens to catch my attention, I'll ask a question or two. He sneered, which in Kell's case seemed as habitual as breathing. My kitchen is clean, my pepper is clean. That fool Price, he gulps wine between courses, he eats without discipline. His stomach collapses, and suddenly it is my reputation. That's one version, I said. Here's another. Somebody slipped something into the sauce, and now you're standing in the blast radius. Either way, it looks bad. He flicked a hand. Bah, you Americans, always needing blame. Price is alive, no? Alive enough to smear my name when he wakes. I will not stand for it. I let him fume while my eyes roved. The counters gleamed, knives lined in military order, copper pans overhead like trophies. And there, at the far end near the prep station, a woman worked with her head bent, auburn hair pinned tight, moving with the quiet grace of someone used to being overlooked. That had to be Mila Petrov, the sous chef Agnes had mentioned. Mind if I speak with her? I asked. Kell's lips thinned. If you must, but she knows nothing. She works, she cuts, she stirs. She does not think. Sounds like my kind of conversationalist, I said, and moved toward her before he could puff up further. Mila noticed me but didn't falter in her slicing. Carrots, neat as soldiers, fell beneath her knife. Up close, I saw she was younger than I'd guessed, late 20s maybe, with eyes that carried a watchfulness her silence disguised. Miss Petrov? I said. Archie Goodwin, Nero Wolfe's associate. Mind if I trouble you for a few words? She paused, glanced toward Kell, then gave a short nod. I do not have much time. Her accent was faintly Russian, but smoothed by years in New York. I'll be quick. You plated the reduction the night Mr. Price went down. Did you notice anything odd about the sauce? her knife stilled. She looked at me properly now, and her voice dropped. It smelled wrong, not the pepper. The pepper is sharp, bright. This was bitter, like metal. And you mentioned that to Kell? She gave the tiniest shake of her head. He does not listen. If I say anything, he says I am stupid. He is genius. I'm Hans. Always. That tracked with Kell's ego. Did anyone else touch the pan before you plated it? I do not know. There were many people. Too many. She glanced again at Kell, who was now in animated argument with a sou over garnish. But I saw Clive Dawn. He was near the station. He should not have been. That raised my eyebrows. You're sure? Yes. He spoke to Bruno, loudly, in front of everyone. Then he walked by the source, smiling. I thought nothing. Now. She shrugged, but her shoulders were tight. Dawn, the rival Agnes had fingered, the one threatening to upstage the gala with his own chilies. If he had been sniffing around Kell's station that night, it meant more than showmanship. I thanked Mila, slipped her a card, and told her to call me if she remembered anything else. She hesitated, then said softly, "Be careful. They think food is art, but for them, it is also war." That was enough to give even me pause. I left Kell's kitchen with more than I'd come for. Out front, the maitre d' handed me a look like I'd tracked mud through Versailles, but I was already pulling out my phone. Saul Panzer answered on the second ring. "Archie," he said, voice flat as always. "Saul, how's the warehouse?" "Interesting," he said. "Her dad runs a clean operation on the surface. Crates labeled, workers polite. But I found something. The lot marked for the gala is missing 2 jars. Her dad claims they were misplaced. Records disagree." 2 jars, I repeated, thinking of the blue glass one that had landed on Wolfe's stoop. That ties it up with a bow. "Maybe," Saul said. "But there's more. Her dad's son was arguing with him, loud, ugly, about money, about risk, something about a shipment from Marseille that Haddad swears he never authorized. The son walked out." "Lovely," I said. "Keep your eyes on him. I've got a sous chef pointing a finger at Dorn for hovering around the sauce the night Price got sick. Which means either Dorn's playing saboteur or someone wants it to look that way." "Either way," Saul said, "I'll dig." I hung up and headed for the curb. A drizzle had started, slicking the pavement, and I caught myself thinking how Wolfe would already be piecing this together without moving an inch. 2 jars gone, a critic down, a rival circling the kitchen like a hawk, and a family squabble at the importers. It was shaping up to be one of those weeks. By the time I made it back to the brownstone, Fritz had dinner waiting, which helped cushion the blow of Wolfe's expression when I relayed what I'd found. He listened in silence, eyes closed, hands steepled, while I laid out Mila's testimony, Dawn's cameo, and Saul's discovery. When I finished, he opened his eyes and skewered me with them. "Archie, it is axiomatic that when men fight over flavor, they are fighting over power. Dawn is vulgar enough to meddle. Haddad's son is reckless enough to betray. But only one fact matters." He tapped the sealed jar on the desk. "This was delivered here. To me. Which means we are no longer observers. We are participants." "Participants in what?" I asked. He leaned back, closed his eyes again, and exhaled. "A contest. And contests, Archie, have casualties." The office was quiet except for the rain tapping the windows. I didn't need to ask what he meant. I'd already seen one man collapse and another empire tremble. And from the look of it, the main course hadn't even been served yet. Wolfe didn't waste the rain. While it needled the windows, he dictated 3 short letters that sounded casual if you didn't know him and like artillery if you did. One to Agnes Vale, requesting a complete guest list and the seating for Friday's gala to prevent incommodious crowding. One to Bruno Kell asking for a copy of the mise en place as executed the night Mr. Price collapsed, down to the weights of salt and ego. And one to Rafik Haddad, polite as a velvet garrote, asking him to send over, by messenger, the full shipping ledger for pimenta fatalis for the last 60 days. Fritz sealed them with a disapproval that suggested even envelopes ought to mind their manners. "Positioning," I said, leaning on the desk. "Precisely," Wolfe murmured. "We will not seek confessions, we will invite contradictions." The first contradiction arrived by telephone. Saul, from a payphone somewhere that echoed like a grain silo. I trailed the son, Nabil Haddad. He met Clive Dorn at a cafe near the river. Dorn did most of the talking. The son looked sick. Money changed hands. Thin envelope. They separated fast. "Photograph it?" I asked. "Too public. I'll keep on them." Wolfe had his eyes shut, but lifted a finger for the receiver. I summarized. He grunted. "Dorn proselytizes. He converts doubt into investment. He needs a scandal to dethrone a spice with a crown." Meaning Dorn could have doctored the source to show the monarch is a fraud, I said, or just to make Kell stumble. "Or both," Wolfe said. "But we do not yet have why for Nabil." He got his why before lunch. Agnes's packet arrived by courier. A progress of names that could fund a hospital wing by losing interest in their pocket change. Seating, long mirrored table in Vera Delaney's ballroom, Agnes at center, Vera at the head, Bruno in theatrical reach of the portable range. Lennox Price assigned the chair nearest the plating station for commentary, which was like tying a stake to your ankle and visiting wolves. At the bottom of the list Agnes had scribbled, "Note. Per Bruno's insistence, rival chef Clive Dorn excluded from official program." Wolfe read it through twice, then a third time with a faint curl to his lip. "Exclusion provokes trespass," he said. Miss Petrov saw Dorn in the kitchen. Agnes removed him from the room where he craved light, so he sought a darker room. "He still needed the powder," I said. "Not supplied by the Crown Jar at our stoop, unless our donor does double duty." Fritz came in to announce lunch and left with a sniff when Wolfe waved him off for 10 minutes. The man considers a delayed plate a personal wound. Wolfe nodded toward the sealed blue jar. "Archie, the Crown sketch on that note. Coarse, but with a flourish on the lowest prong. Find who writes crowns with pretensions. Begin with publicity. The Circle's printer, Bruno's menu designer, Dorn's pamphleteer." "That's 3 prigs and a pamphleteer," I said. "I'll start with the one who spells coriander wrong." "You jest," Wolfe said, "but spelling betrays as surely as scent." I made my rounds. The Circle's printer had ink on his cuffs and opinions on kerning. He drew his crowns pointy and humorless. Bruno's menu designer produced a sketch like a tiara on stilts and pouted when I praised it. She was also 5'2" with nails that could not seal wax if her life depended on it. Dorn's man, though, there was the flourish. He operated out of a loft that smelled of glue and ambition, and when I asked him to doodle a crown for scale, he did it with the same insolent wiggle at the base as our note. He saw my eyebrow and shrugged. "Brand consistency," he said. "Clive likes the monarchy myth." I called Wolfe from a booth downstairs. "It matches." "Good," he said. "Do not accuse him. Let him arrive at the gala thinking he leads the dance." Back at the brownstone, the air had shifted half a degree toward satisfaction. Agnes had also enclosed Price's medical update from St. Timothy's. Stable, cranky, and asking for wine through a straw. Kell's reply arrived by messenger, 6 pages of inventory and a handwriting that looked like knife scars, plus a margin note. Saucepan accounted for. Reduction ladled by MC Petrov. No foreign substances. Accusations will be pursued in court. He had underlined court 3 times. People who underline also overcompensate. Then came Haddad's ledger. Clean columns, stamped entries, and, nestled in the neatness, the Marseille shipment Saul mentioned. 12 jars outside the normal allotment, marked Promotional Circle. Credit signed not by Rafik, but by Nabil. 2 jars missing from the warehouse count. The hairs on my forearms offered a small salute. Wolfe's eyes opened. The son seeks to finance a leap with spice as collateral. Dawn is his evangelist. The missing jars are weapons. One has already been brandished at our door. Meaning the other could be in Dawn's pocket, I said. Or Price's stomach, Wolfe said. But no, we have Miss Petrov's nose. Bitter metal, not the pepper's high volatile. Arsenic or a cousin, an adulterant, not intrinsic to the fruit. I don't like arsenic in conversation around lunch, but Fritz saved me. He rolled in with a tureen and a glare for the sealed jar. Wolfe suffered food gladly and silence better, so I waited him out. When the plates were cleared, he said, Archie, invite them, this evening at 8. Agnes, Kell, Rafik and the son, Dawn, Miss Petrov, and Vera Delaney. Also, a courier to St. Timothy's. If Price can't come, we send a recorder and take his voice. Your office gathering, I said, with a crown on the invitation. Bah, he said, write urgent and discreet. The discreet will come because of the urgent because of the discreet. They came. Money always finds a chair. Vera Delaney arrived first and tried to own the room by announcing that she never sits facing a door. Wolfe didn't rise to relocate the door, so she took the second-best angle. Agnes wore leadership like a coat that still had the tailor's chalk on it. Bruno stalked in armed with indignation. Rafik was dignity, Nabil a bundle of nerves in expensive cloth. Dawn breezed, smelling faintly of smoke and newsletters. Mila Petrov took the end seat and folded into invisibility. Wolfe didn't open with a speech. He let quiet do reconnaissance. When everyone had adjusted to the sound of their own breathing, he said, a critic collapsed because the food was adulterated. The adulteration served 3 appetites: a rival's ambition, a son's relief from debt, and a chef's theater. The 4th appetite, his eyes flicked toward Agnes, was for spectacle without accountability. Agnes bristled. Mr. Wolfe. You will wait, he said, mild and immovable. Mr. Dawn, your propagandist doodles a crown with a vulgar flourish. One such crowned my stoop. You preach against the monarch myth because it is not yours. You would dethrone it with scandal. Dawn smiled, teeth friendly, eyes not. Colorful. But I don't poison, I persuade. Mr. Haddad, Wolfe, continued, your books are tidy, your sons are not. He authorized a shipment you would never have countenanced, then courted this mountebank. A nod at Dawn. To elicit momentum. 2 jars are misplaced. One arrived here. Why? Nabil opened his mouth, shut it, looked at his father, and found no harbor there. I wanted, he began, and stalled on the past tense. Wanted profit without patience, Wolfe supplied. Miss Petrov, your nose is honest. You smelled metal. Did you see anyone's hand over the pan? Mila lifted her chin. Dawn passed close. Kell turned to argue with Price. I plated. Kell exploded. You dare... Silence, Wolfe said. Chef, your vanity is an open window. Someone reached through it. They used your rage for cover. The room tightened. Wolfe's eyelids drooped. His voice sank to the register that means he is finished with doubt. I will not, tonight, name the hand that poured. I will, however, in the pretense that this pepper is fatal by nature. It is not. It has been made so by men with smaller palates than their appetites. The gala will proceed under my conditions, or not at all. Archie will circulate them. They didn't like that. They also didn't argue with it. Wolfe had shifted the ground. The next move would be theirs, and he had arranged the furniture so only one path remained for the guilty. Toward exposure. When the door closed on the last of them, I said, You're not naming the hand because you don't know yet. He poked out a lower lip. Because I wish to watch them tremble. Tomorrow, the smallest trespass will convict. Which trespass? He looked at the sealed jar and smiled, which is rarer than truffles out of season. The one they think I cannot taste. If Wolfe had intended to rattle them, he'd succeeded. The evening after his little gathering, the brownstone was quieter than usual. Even the radiator hiss sounded cautious, as if it didn't want to be overheard. I had a stack of notes on my desk, Saul's update still warm from the wire, and Wolfe had sunk deep into the yellow chair, eyelids at half-mast, fingers drumming on the armrest in a rhythm only he understood. Fritz clattered pans in the kitchen, restoring balance through saucepans, but the air in the office still felt taut, like a string wound, one twist too far. The first crack in the armor came early. At 9 sharp, the phone rang. I picked it up. On the other end was a voice trying to sound calm but betraying itself with shallow breaths. It was Nabil Haddad. "Mr. Goodwin, I need to see Mr. Wolfe, privately, tonight." Wolfe heard the tone even across the room. His eyes opened. "Tell him," Wolfe murmured, "that my doors are not ajar at whim. 10 tomorrow, prompt." I relayed it. Nabil protested, pleaded, then hung up after I promised nothing more. Wolfe closed his eyes again, but his lips tugged downward. Weakness precedes confession. He will come, apart. By 10 the next morning, Nabil arrived with his collar undone and the sheen of a man who hadn't slept. He sat stiffly, staring at the Persian rug like it was an executioner. Wolfe didn't help him out. He let silence do the digging. Finally, Nabil blurted, "I never meant. I only thought if Dorn helped market the pepper, we could corner the circle. My father, he's too cautious. I saw opportunity, but I didn't poison price. I swear it." Wolfe didn't blink. 2 jars missing, 1 left on my stoop. Where is the other? Nabil's hands trembled. I gave it to Dorn. He said he needed proof for investors. He promised nothing like this. "Pfui," Wolfe said. "Men who promise investors always promised more than they can deliver. You are complicit. Whether Dorn poured the adulterant or persuaded another, you enabled." Nabil sagged. "If my father learns—" "He already knows," Wolfe said, voice like granite. "Archie." I showed Nabil to the door, where he wilted like a cut stem. Outside, Saul had parked himself across the street to shadow him on Wolfe's orders. As Nabil scurried into a cab, Saul raised a hand in salute. Another thread knotted. When I came back in, Wolfe had his eyes closed again. "Dorn has the second jar. He will act before the gala, or at it. The stage is his narcotic." That prediction got legs the same afternoon. A messenger arrived with a cream envelope, no return address. Inside was a card embossed with a crown. Not crude this time, but gleaming in gold. On it, "Friday's feast will prove fatal. Let the circle taste its lies." I slid it across Wolfe's desk. He opened one eye, grunted, and shut it again. "Dorn, he believes in theater." "You think he'll actually try again?" I asked. "I think he must," Wolfe said. "His campaign requires spectacle. Price's collapse was prelude. The gala is his stage. He will adulterate again or contrive its illusion. Archie, we must ensure the curtain falls on him, not us." That set me on my next round. I visited Price in St. Timothy's, a place that smelled like antiseptic and regret. He was propped up, still pale, but alive enough to complain. When I asked about the night, he sneered weakly. Kell thought he'd dazzle me. I told him his sauce was over-reduced. Then, I don't remember. Bitterness. Darkness. "See anyone near your plate?" Dorn, of course. He buzzed like a fly. "And Agnes?" She fluttered. Always fluttering. They all want me at their table. Even from my bed I make or break them. He smirked, then coughed. I left him to his self-importance. Wolfe had been right. Price was alive, but barely, and his memory was more ego than evidence. Still, it was another nail in Dawn's stagecraft. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe had Saul on the line, listening with his eyes closed. Saul had trailed Dawn to a warehouse near the docks. Not Haddad's, but rented under another name. Inside, crates stacked like props and men moving with the rhythm of rehearsal, not labor. Saul swore he smelled spice, sharp and acrid, mixed with something metallic. He didn't enter. He never overplays his hand. But the image was enough. When Saul hung up, Wolfe opened his eyes. "The gala," he said, "is no longer a dinner. It is a trap. Dawn intends to unmask the pepper as poison before the assembled benefactors, destroying Haddad, discrediting Vale, elevating himself. He will attempt to stage another collapse, perhaps several. We shall invert the stage." I raised an eyebrow. "Meaning what?" "Meaning Archie. We will let him prepare his performance. Then, when the curtain rises, we shall provide the denouement. Quietly, precisely. Before dessert. That's how it always was with Wolfe. He'd sit, still as a boulder, while the world scrambled itself into knots. And then, at the last possible moment, he'd tug one thread, and the whole mess would fall flat. I had no doubt Dawn's crown would slip. What worried me was how many bodies he'd dragged down before it did. The next evening brought confirmation. Agnes Vale herself returned, her composure cracked at the edges. "Mr. Wolfe," she said, "I've received anonymous threats. If we proceed, there will be disaster. But canceling the gala would be a humiliation. What am I to do?" Wolfe steepled his fingers. "Proceed. But under my conditions. The menu will be served exactly as listed, but the sauces, everyone, will be prepared under supervision." "Mine." Agnes blinked. "Yours?" "Fui, not mine directly. Fritz will attend. He is incorruptible." Fritz, summoned, puffed up like a rooster, but agreed. Agnes, desperate, accepted. When she left, I leaned against the desk. "So now we're catering a gala." "We are preserving order," Wolfe said. "The kitchen is the battlefield. Fritz will guard the arsenal. You, Archie, will watch Dawn. He will not resist meddling, catch his hand, and the play is ended." That was Wolfe's plan, turn their stage into his trap. All I had to do was stand close enough to Dawn to catch him in the act without becoming the next critic on a hospital bed. Not my favorite assignment, but in our line, somebody had to move while Wolfe thought. The rain had stopped by then, and the city was breathing steam from the sidewalks. Inside the brownstone, the sealed jar still sat on Wolfe's desk, glinting faintly in the lamplight like it knew it was the star of the show. Wolfe regarded it once, then shut his eyes. "Archie," he said softly, "they believe flavor is fatal. We will show them folly is." And that was that. The calm before the feast, and the certainty that when the plates were served, truth would be the bitterest course. The Delaney mansion had seen its share of spectacles. Weddings that drained trust funds, fundraisers that promised cures, dinners where fortunes rose and fell over soufflé, but I doubted it had ever been this taut with nerves. By the time I arrived, tucks polished and credentials in pocket, the marble foyer glittered with chandeliers and self-importance. Vera Delaney, tall and lacquered, greeted her guests like a queen welcoming vassals. Wolfe had refused to leave the brownstone naturally, so the moving parts of the plan rested on me and Fritz. I had the easier half. Keep my eyes on Clive Dawn. Fritz, poor soul, had to man the kitchen with Bruno Kell, which was like being locked in a cage with a temperamental tiger and asked to polish its claws. Agnes Vale was already pacing near the entrance to the ballroom, her composure stitched tight but straining at the seams. She spotted me, leaned in and whispered, "Is everything in place?" "As much as it can be," I said. "Fritz is in the kitchen guarding the sauces. He'll faint before letting anything slip past him." My job is to keep Dawn in my sights. Wolfe has his net ready back at the brownstone. Her relief was shallow. No one relaxes when their career is about to be diced on the cutting board. But she nodded and drifted back to her circle of anxious benefactors. The ballroom was a sea of linen and crystal, long mirrored tables gleaming under chandeliers and waiters gliding like swans. At the far end, Kell presided over a portable range with the air of Napoleon before battle. He barked instructions in French and profanity in English, his hands moving like blades. And there, in the middle distance, was Dawn. He hadn't even bothered to disguise himself. He wore a tux that didn't quite fit, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, and he was working the room with the slick assurance of a man convinced he'd already won. I drifted closer, champagne in hand, listening. He was murmuring to a knot of donors about truth in flavor and the fraud of legends. Every other sentence landed like bait, daring someone to ask about the monarch pepper. They didn't, of course. New York society doesn't like open fights at the dinner table. They prefer to let someone else spill the wine first. The first course passed without incident. Soup, smooth, delicate, and safe under Fritz's watchful glare. I slipped into the kitchen twice, brushing past the swinging doors to check on him. He was stationed like a sentinel near the saucepans, arms folded, face red with indignation at Kell's constant posturing. Kell pretended Fritz wasn't there, but I saw the twitch in his jaw every time Fritz corrected a ladle angle or sniffed a reduction. The second course was when the tension sharpened. A roasted quail with a reduction, featuring, of course, pimenta fatalis. The sauce shimmered in copper pans under Fritz's hawk eyes. Kell, puffed with pride, drizzled it himself onto plates as waiters swept them away. I caught the faint aroma, sharp, grassy, promising fire, but not danger. If Dawn was going to make his move, this was his window. Sure enough, as the plates reached the table, Dawn began to circulate. He leaned over shoulders, joked too loudly, and in one case actually picked up a fork from a startled guest and twirled it for demonstration. His grin widened when Price's empty seat was mentioned. Still in hospital, his absence noted by all. Dawn quipped, perhaps his stomach had better taste than his tongue. Laughter followed, brittle but obedient. I stayed within arm's reach, letting him feel my shadow without announcing it. Twice I saw his hand twitch toward a plate, only to draw back when my eyes caught his. The man was itching for drama, but hadn't yet found his cue. Then came the third course. Fish with a glaze that was again rumored to include the monarch pepper. This was the dish that Kell insisted would redeem his genius. I stationed myself near the sideboard where extra plates waited, and that's when I saw it. Dawn slipped close, hand darting like a pickpocket's, and brushed the rim of a dish with something palmed from his tux pocket. It was quick, practiced, but not quick enough for me. I caught his wrist mid-motion. His smile faltered. "Problem?" he asked softly. "Yeah," I said. "You're about to lose your appetite." He tried to laugh it off, withdrawing his hand, but I held it a moment longer. Between his fingers was a tiny packet, silver-papered, barely larger than a sugar sachet. I plucked it and slipped it into my own pocket. He blustered. "Seasoning, promotional, nothing sinister." "Tell it to Wolfe," I said. That rattled him. He tried to slide away, but by then Agnes had noticed. Her face paled as she saw us. I gave her a reassuring nod, but the damage was done. Eyes turned, whispers spread, and suddenly the gala was humming like a hive about to swarm. I let Dawn retreat for now. Wolfe would want him cornered with words, not fists. The rest of the dinner unfolded under a cloud, with Kell obliviously preening, Fritz maintaining his guard, and Agnes sipping wine like it was morphine. Dawn sulked but didn't bolt. He couldn't, not without confirming guilt. By dessert, the tension had stretched to breaking. When the final plates were cleared, Agnes tapped her glass and announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, before we close this evening, Mr. Nero Wolfe has requested that his associate address you." That was my cue. I stood, aware of 100 expectant eyes, and said, "Mr. Wolfe regrets his absence, but he is engaged in ensuring truth remains on the table. Tonight you've tasted dishes rumored fatal, yet you live. That is because the pepper itself is harmless. What makes a flavor deadly isn't the spice, it's sabotage. And sabotage was attempted again this evening." Gasps rippled. Dawn flushed crimson, half rising, but I pressed on. The saboteur was caught in the act. His hand will be named soon enough. For now, rest assured the monarch pepper is no fraud. What is fraudulent is the man who sought to poison it. And you. I didn't name Dawn directly. That was Wolfe's privilege in his office, on his terms. But the room turned toward him anyway, whispers sharpening, eyes narrowing. He tried to laugh, raising his glass, but his hand trembled. The dinner ended in a storm of speculation. Guests filed out, some shaken, some gleeful. Fritz emerged from the kitchen, flushed but triumphant. "Not one spoon passed my sight," he declared. I clapped his shoulder. Later, back at the brownstone, I handed Wolfe the packet Dawn had nearly emptied into the sauce. He opened it with delicate disdain, sniffed and said, "Bitter, metallic, as Miss Petrov described. Arsenic compound, crude." He closed it again. "Dawn has overreached. Tomorrow he will come here with protestations. He will leave stripped of pretense." I sank into the red chair, exhausted but wired. "And the circle." "They will dine again," Wolfe said, reaching for his beer. "Because appetite forgets, but Dawn will not. Appetite consumes him." He closed his eyes, and just like that, the storm outside was contained within these walls, waiting for Wolfe's final strike. Dawn didn't waste time. The morning after the gala, when the echoes of crystal and whispers still lingered in Manhattan's breakfast tables, he showed up at the brownstone uninvited. That's the sort of thing Wolfe hates more than untidy butter. Fritz opened the door to find him flushed, cravat loose, and confidence curdled into desperation. I was at my desk, jotting down notes for Wolfe's files, when Fritz's voice thundered, "Mr. Goodwin, this man insists." I went to the hall and found Dawn trying to bulldoze past Fritz. He was wagging a rolled newspaper in his hand, the headline screaming about fatal flavor scandal at Delaney Gala. His eyes darted, ferret quick, and he said, "Goodwin, listen, your Mr. Wolfe doesn't understand. I was set up. That packet, a plant. I came to clear my name." "Sure," I said, stepping between him and Fritz. "Come in. Wolfe loves company at breakfast." Wolfe, of course, was at the table dealing with trout in aspic and pretending that human beings didn't exist. He didn't look up as Dawn stormed into the dining room, still brandishing the paper. "Mr. Wolfe," Dawn said, "you allowed your assistant to malign me in front of society. My reputation, my career, ruined, I demand." "Sit," Wolfe said without glancing up. Dawn blinked, flustered, then dropped into the nearest chair. He slapped the paper down. "They think I'm a criminal. This is libel. Price collapses from his own vices, and suddenly I'm accused of poisoning sources." "Absurd," Wolfe chewed deliberately, swallowed and sipped beer before speaking. "You are absurd, Mr. Dawn, but not for the reason you suppose." I leaned against the door frame, arms crossed. Dawn fidgeted, his voice rising. "That packet, you must know it wasn't mine. Someone slipped it in my pocket. Vale, perhaps, or Kell. They all despise me." "Pwee," Wolfe said. "Mr. Goodwin intercepted you mid-motion. His eyes are sharper than your excuses. You intended to adulterate a dish. That packet contained an arsenic derivative, precisely as Miss Petrov described from Price's collapse. Your flourish was clumsy." Dawn's face darkened. "Petrov? That mouse? She imagines things. Enough," Wolfe cut in, setting his fork down. Mr. Dorn, you mistake my tolerance for ignorance. You proselytize against the monarch pepper because it threatens your vanity. You seduced a foolish youth, Nabil Haddad, into supplying you jars meant for the circle. You sought to prove the pepper fatal by falsifying its flavor. When price collapsed, you gloated. But your scheme was incomplete. You required spectacle at the gala to cement your claim. That is why you returned with the packet. That is why you failed. For once, Dorn had no patter. His mouth worked, but no words came out. I took the silence as my cue. Boss, should I call Kramer? Dorn jerked up, panicked. No police. Please. I'm Mr. Wolfe. You must understand. It was never meant to kill, just sickness. Enough to expose the fraud. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. You delude yourself. You poisoned not flavor, but faith. You would destroy Haddad's business, Vale's society, Kell's kitchen, and Price's body, all for vanity. Dorn slumped, sweat beading his forehead. You can't, if you expose me. Everything I built, gone. Correct, Wolfe said coolly. But unlike you, I have no appetite for destruction. Archie. I guided Dorn back to the office, sat him down in the red chair, and let him stew while Wolfe settled into his throne behind the desk. The room was thick with the smell of cigars Wolfe hadn't yet lit, a courtroom without gavel or jury. Mr. Dorn, Wolfe began, you are not alone in culpability. Nabil Haddad abetted you. He will face his father's censure and the laws. But you are the fulcrum. Your pamphlets, your crowns, your theatrics, they are the pattern's spine. Without you, no collapse. With you, disaster. Do you deny it? Dorn sagged. No, I cannot. Wolfe closed his eyes. Archie, fetch Saul. He will escort Mr. Dorn to Inspector Kramer. The police will have evidence sufficient. Dorn bolted upright. Wolfe, please, I will confess privately. I will leave the city. Wolfe's voice cut him off like a blade. This is not theater, sir. You poison my stoop, my peace, my Fritz's kitchen. You will not escape. The finality in his tone broke Dorn. He sank back, muttering curses. Within the hour, Saul arrived, efficient as ever, and marched Dorn out like luggage. Fritz watched from the hall, his face stern but relieved. Justice, he said softly, and returned to his kitchen. When the door closed, Wolfe leaned back, eyes heavy. Archie, he murmured, prepare memoranda. Agnes Vale, absolved but admonished for negligence. Rafik Haddad, absolved, his son, guilty of folly. Kell, absolved, but warned of vanity. Dorn, condemned. Price, he hesitated, lip curling. Price will never learn. I scribbled notes. And Wolfe? He looked at me then, eyes sharp through the half-lids. Wolfe will eat his lunch. That was his verdict. Clean, cold, irrefutable. The brownstone, once again, had devoured deception and left only truth on the plate. That evening, over Fritz's roast duck, Wolfe allowed himself a final remark. Archie, men chase crowns, literal, figurative, culinary. They poison themselves with ambition and call it flavor, but true appetite requires restraint. I raised my glass. Here's to restraint, and to the fattest man in New York teaching it. He grunted, closed his eyes, and sipped his beer, which in Wolfe's world is the same as a benediction. By the time Saul marched Dorn into Kramer's waiting arms, the city had already started chewing on the scandal like a bone. The morning editions were filled with speculation, most of it wrong, but all of it delicious to readers. Wolfe, as usual, ignored the noise. He spent the afternoon with his orchids, leaving me to handle the phone calls. Agnes Vale rang 3 times, each with a new panic. Donors threatening withdrawal, Vera Delaney threatening litigation, and a gossip columnist threatening exposure. I told her to breathe and promised Wolfe would settle it. She didn't sound convinced, but desperation makes people hang on even when the rope is fraying. When Wolfe finally came down for beer and lamb stew, he waved me toward the desk. "Archie, prepare summons. All parties. Tonight, 8 o'clock." I whistled. "You mean Agnes, Kel, Haddad Sr., Nabil, Vera, and Miss Petrov? The whole cast?" "Yes." His eyes glinted, half shut. "The denouement requires an audience. Justice is most effective when it resonates." So I made the calls. Each met with resistance, denial, or outright shrieking, but none refused. That's the gravitational pull of Wolfe. Once you're in his orbit, you either burn or freeze, but you don't escape. By 8, the brownstone was a theater. Fritz had cleared the dining table, set chairs in the office, and arranged water glasses with the severity of a magistrate. Wolfe sat behind his desk, immovable, hands folded across the mound of his middle. I stationed myself near the door, notebook ready, revolver in reach just in case dramatics turned physical. Unlikely, but with Kel's temper and Vera's hauteur, I wasn't taking bets. They filed in, Agnes Vale first, her hat more subdued than last time, nerves stitched tight beneath composure. Rafiq Haddad, stern as granite, his son Nabil trailing behind, pale and sweating. Bruno Kell stormed in like he was auditioning for the role of injured genius, muttering about wasted hours. Vera Delaney swept in late, all perfume and frost. Mila Petrov, quiet as ever, slipped into a corner chair, unnoticed until you looked directly at her. When they had settled, Wolfe lifted his chin. "Ladies and gentlemen, this office has endured trespass. That I do not forgive. You will listen, and you will depart with clarity. Archie, the door." I closed it with a click. Silence hung heavy. Wolfe began, voice low but steady, carrying without effort. "You were gathered by appetite, a spice, rediscovered, promised exclusivity and profit. Appetite breeds folly, folly breeds betrayal. Mr. Price collapsed because a sauce was adulterated. At the gala, another attempt was made. The culprit has been apprehended." Gasps circled the room. Vera leaned forward, eyes bright with the thrill of drama. Agnes pressed her gloves tight in her lap. Kel snorted. "Clive Dorn," Wolfe continued, "conspired with Nabil Haddad to secure jars of pimenta fatalis outside his father's sanction. He intended to destroy the circle's unveiling and elevate his own invention. He adulterated the sauce at the preview, nearly killing Price. He attempted again at the gala. Mr. Goodwin intercepted him. All eyes swung toward Nabil. He wilted under the gaze. His father's lips compressed into a single line. "Is this true?" Rafiq asked, voice like thunder restrained. Nabil stammered. I only thought. Dorn said it was harmless, just for show." "Silence," Wolfe cut in. "You betrayed your father's trust and endangered others. Folly compounded by cowardice, but your culpability, while grave, is secondary. Dorn orchestrated, you abetted." Kell slammed a fist against his chair arm. "So my kitchen was innocent, my art maligned for nothing." Wolfe's eyelids fluttered. "Phooey, your vanity opened the door. You quarreled with Price, abandoned your station, allowed distraction to eclipse discipline. You did not poison, but you permitted access. A chef who cannot guard his own pan invites ruin." Kell's face reddened, but he bit back a retort. Even he knew better than to spar with Wolfe in his own arena. Vera Delaney raised her chin. "And what of me? Must I endure scandal when I lent only my home?" Wolfe turned his gaze, heavy as stone. "You craved spectacle, not substance. You permitted a gala when prudence demanded pause. You are complicit, not in act, but in arrogance. You will endure the scandal you courted." She sniffed, lips pursed, but offered no denial. Agnes Vale spoke then, voice thin. "Mr. Wolfe, I sought only to preserve the circle. If mistakes were made—" "You sought prestige," Wolfe interrupted. "You ignored warning, dismissed risk, pursued display. You are absolved of malice, guilty of negligence. The circle survives because others intervened. Remember that. Agnes bowed her head. For once, her composure cracked, and she looked less president than penitent. Finally, Wolfe's gaze moved to Mila Petrov, still and watchful. You observed dawn near the pan. You spoke the truth when silence was easier. You preserved integrity. For that, you have my regard. Mila blinked, surprised, and inclined her head. The room was hushed. Wolfe leaned back, folding his hands. The facts are concluded. Dawn will answer to the law, Nabil to his father, the rest of you to your consciences. You may leave. No one moved at first. Then, one by one, they rose. Agnes, pale but steady. Rafik, fury-controlled, gripping his son's arm like iron. Kel, muttering but subdued. Vera, mask of dignity intact but cracked at the edges. Mila, silent as smoke. When the door closed behind them, the brownstone exhaled. Wolfe reached for his beer, raised it, and sipped. "Archie," he said, "order has been restored. Appetite has been chastened. That is sufficient." I closed my notebook, slid it into the drawer, and leaned against the desk. "Funny thing about appetite," I said. "It always comes back." Wolfe shut his eyes. "So does vigilance. That is why I'm indispensable." He wasn't wrong. Outside, the city roared with its endless hungers. Inside, the brownstone stood immovable, with Wolfe at its center, calm, precise, unyielding. And me, still chasing threads so he could weave them into truth. That's how it always ends, and how it always begins again. The brownstone had a way of absorbing drama, swallowing it whole until only the scent of orchids and Fritz's butter sauces lingered. By the morning after Wolfe's inquisition, the office looked as if nothing had ever rattled it. The red leather chairs shone, the desks sat heavy with order, and Wolfe himself presided in his great seat, eyes half closed as if the previous night's parade of guilty consciences had been nothing more than a gust of wind through the curtains. Still, the echo of that gathering clung to the air like smoke after a fire. Fritz brought in breakfast with particular satisfaction, setting down eggs, rye toast, and Wolfe's beer. "It is done," he said, with more finality than the plate deserved. "The poisoner is gone. The kitchen is clean." Wolfe grunted, which for him was as close to a thank you as anyone ever received. He broke the yolk of an egg and let it bleed across the plate. I had my coffee in hand and leaned back at my desk. "Saul just called. Dorn's sitting in a cell at the Tombs, courtesy of Kramer. He sang enough to stitch his own shroud. Said it was all for show, just to unmask the fraud of the Monarch Pepper. Kramer wasn't impressed." Wolfe's lip curled faintly. "Kramer never is." "Agnes Vale called too," I added. "She wanted to thank you again. Said the circle will survive, though it's going to take more than a month to scrub the scandal off the tablecloth. She asked if you'd accept an honorary membership as recognition." That got both eyebrows. "Pui," Wolfe said, "a society of gastronomes who mistake vanity for taste." I declined. "I figured," I said, jotting it down as a formal refusal. "But you should know she seemed sincere. Maybe humiliation will improve her palate." Wolfe chewed, swallowed, and reached for his beer. Doubtful. The phone rang again before I could reply. This time it was Rafik Haddad. His voice carried the weary dignity of a man who had aged a decade overnight. He thanked Wolfe in grave, formal terms, then asked for privacy as he dealt with his son. I caught the edge in his tone. Nabil was unlikely to enjoy the process. Wolfe offered only a terse "attend to him," and hung up. When I looked at him, Wolfe's expression was unreadable. "You pity the boy?" I asked. "I pity folly," he said, "but not its repetition." That was Wolfe's mercy, limited, measured, conditional on lessons learned. Nabil would either emerge chastened or crushed. It wasn't Wolfe's concern anymore. By noon, Vera Delaney had dispatched a note of her own. Delivered on embossed stationery, it managed to combine apology with insult. She regretted any inconvenience, but reminded Wolfe that her mansion had hosted an evening never to be forgotten. Wolfe didn't even open it. He waved it toward me. "Burn it." I tucked it into a file instead. Some relics are worth keeping, if only for the laugh later. The only one who hadn't surfaced was Bruno Kell. He'd stormed out of the brownstone the night before in a blaze of indignation, vowing lawsuits, exposés, and revenge. By the next day, though, the papers carried quotes from him about how his art had triumphed over slander and how the monarch pepper had been redeemed by his genius. He was back to crowing from the rooftops. Wolfe read the article, snorted, and went back to his orchids. "Let him preen," Wolfe said. "He has learned nothing, but he is not dangerous, merely insufferable." That left only one figure unaccounted for: Mila Petrov. She arrived that evening, hesitant at the door, a simple dress replacing her kitchen whites. Fritz ushered her into the office, where Wolfe regarded her with the same calm weight he gave to heads of state and sous chefs alike. She sat stiffly, clutching her handbag. "I wish to say thank you," she murmured. "If you had not listened to me, no one would." Wolfe inclined his head. "Truth deserves attention," you observed honestly. "That is rare." She hesitated, then added, "I have no place now. Kell dismisses me. The circle. After scandal, no one hires easily." Wolfe's eyes half shut. "I'm not an employment agency. However, Mr. Goodwin may know of opportunities. Archie." I caught her glance, saw the quiet plea in her eyes. She wasn't asking for charity, just a chance. "I'll make some calls," I said. "There are decent kitchens in the city that care more for work than theatre. You'll land somewhere better." She exhaled, relief flickering across her face. She stood, bowed slightly toward Wolfe, and left as quietly as she had entered. When the door closed, Wolfe muttered, "Integrity deserves continuity. See to it." It was one of the few times he'd given me an order without garnish. I nodded. That night over dinner, veal tender and fragrant, Wolfe finally allowed himself reflection. He set his fork down, leaned back, and let his voice roll slow. "Archie, men pursue crowns, literal, culinary, symbolic. They poison themselves chasing them. Dawn sought to enthrone himself with falsehood. Vale sought to preserve her crown of prestige. Haddad's son sought to inherit one without earning it. All were consumed." "Meanwhile," I said, "Price just wanted to sneer at somebody's sauce." "Pfui, Price is his own punishment." Wolfe lifted his beer. "The lesson endures. Appetite without restraint is lethal, not the spice, the folly." I let that hang in the air, the words heavy and final. Later, as I tidied the office, Wolfe already snoring softly in his chair, I jotted a closing line in my notes. The monarch pepper would return to tables, stripped of scandal. The circle would stagger on. Dawn would rot behind bars, Nabel under his father's eye, Agnes under her donor's scrutiny. And Wolfe would continue to sit immovable, dismantling human folly, one case at a time. As I switched off the lamp, I couldn't resist adding my own quip. The fatal flavor wasn't in the pepper. It was in the people who thought they could season truth to their taste. That seemed about right. The week after Dorn's downfall felt like the city itself had exhaled. The headlines gave way to other scandals: an alderman's graft, a banker's mistress, a fire in Queens. But inside the brownstone, the residue of the case lingered. You don't have a jar of arsenic-laced spice dropped on your stoop without feeling the floorboards hum for days afterward. Fritz polished the silver twice as often, as though gleam itself could ward off trespass. Wolfe retreated to his orchids with renewed intensity, spending longer hours upstairs, muttering to the blossoms as if they had better manners than people. Me? I did what I always do after we drag a mess into daylight. I tied up loose ends. That meant fielding Agnes Vale's fluttering phone calls, fending off reporters who wanted Wolfe's quotable wrath, and checking in on Mila Petrov, who, thanks to a quiet nudge from me, landed a trial at a small but promising bistro in Soho. She wrote me a note, 3 lines, modest and neat, saying simply that she was grateful for honesty and silence alike. I tucked it in my drawer. It's good to have reminders that not every soul in this city is out to season truth with poison. But while the outside world thought the matter settled, Wolfe hadn't fully dismissed it. One evening, after Fritz's cassoulet and before the first of his evening beers, he beckoned me into the office. His eyes were shut, but his voice was crisp. "Archie, report." I set my notebook on the desk. Dawn's lawyer tried to float a plea, but Kramer's pushing hard. With the packet from the gala and Saul's observations at the warehouse, the DA's case is solid. Nabil Haddad's cooperating. He spilled everything about Dawn's promises, the Marseille shipment, and his own foolishness, his father's bankrolling restitution in exchange for leniency. Looks like the boy will dodge prison, though he'll be counting beans in Casablanca before he sees another jar of pepper. Wolfe grunted. Appropriate. Exile is often more instructive than punishment. Vale's holding the circle together with string and hope. Vera Delaney's pretending the scandal was good publicity, which tells you all you need to know about her. Kell's still preening, but at least he's not suing. Price is back in print, pen sharper than his memory. He's turned the whole affair into a sermon on culinary hubris, which is rich, considering the man can't tell bechamel from plaster. That earned a twitch at the corner of Wolfe's mouth. His version of a belly laugh. Men forget their own folly fastest. I leaned back. So that's everyone accounted for. Case closed. He opened his eyes then, dark and steady. Concluded. Never closed. I should have expected that. Wolfe never let a thread go slack if he could see where it led. He pointed a finger at the blue glass jar, still sealed, still resting on the corner of his desk like an artifact. "This," he said, "remains." I frowned. The arsenic compound tested out. Dawn's fingerprints, his handwriting on the crown note, case wrapped with a bow. "What's left?" "Intent," Wolfe said. Dawn desired spectacle, not subtlety. Yet he chose arsenic. Coarse, detectable, unsubtle. Why? A dramatist prefers flourish. He might have sought a slower, more theatrical poison. But he did not, which means haste or influence. "You're saying someone else nudged him?" "Perhaps." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Or perhaps the hand that drew the crown was steadier than the hand that poured. "Consider, Price collapsed but did not die. Dawn had motive but lacked precision. He wished for scandal, not corpses, which suggests the fatal dose was tampered with before it reached him." That was Wolfe, always carving new patterns in the wood long after others declared it polished. I chewed on it. "So you're hinting that Dawn might have been a pawn as much as a player?" "I do not hint, I deduce." He closed his eyes again. "But whether Dawn was fool or knave matters little now. The law will consume him. My duty was to protect this house from intrusion. That I have done." I let it go. Wolfe never chased shadows once he'd decided the balance was restored. Still, the idea of an unseen hand tugging strings left me uneasy. The following night, Agnes herself came to the brownstone. She wore a simpler hat, contrition stitched into every seam of her suit. She thanked Wolfe in careful words, offered him membership again, and received the same disdainful refusal. When she turned to me, I told her gently that the circle might survive best by remembering food is sustenance before it is spectacle. She actually smiled at that, weary but genuine, and left lighter than she arrived. After she was gone, Wolfe leaned back. "Archie, mark this. She will cling to her presidency, but she will never again trust a gala more than her instincts. That is growth, rare as truffles. Maybe, I said, but she'll still invite Price back to sneer at sauces. Of course, appetite always resumes. Later that week, Fritz finally allowed himself to relax. He prepared a dinner free of pepper entirely, a symbolic cleansing. When Wolfe tasted it, he nodded once and declared, "Sanctity restored." Fritz nearly glowed. That was when I knew the brownstone was itself again. The trespass was over, the sanctity intact. Still, as I filed my notes, I caught myself staring at the blue glass jar, sealed and silent. Wolfe wouldn't let it be discarded. He said once that relics remind us of what not to repeat. Maybe he was right. But I couldn't shake the thought that somewhere in the city, another hand was already grinding ambitions into spice, waiting for the next fool to swallow. That night, over brandy, Wolfe spoke one last time on the matter. His voice was low, deliberate. "Archie, men seek flavor in life, but when they cannot find it, they manufacture it, even if it poisons them. That is the eternal folly." I raised my glass. "Then here's to flavor, boss, and to leaving the poison to the fools." He shut his eyes, sipped, and muttered, "Satisfactory." And just like that, the house settled back into its rhythm. Orchids upstairs, saucepans below, Wolfe in his chair, and me with my notes. Outside, the city still roared with its endless hungers. But here, for the moment, truth had been served. Kramer came by the brownstone 2 days after Dawn's arraignment, not because he wanted Wolfe's company, he'd rather swallow glass, but because politics demanded it. He trudged into the office with the weight of City Hall pressing on his shoulders, tossed his hat onto a chair, and growled like a man who'd bitten into an olive, expecting a cherry. "You've made my life hell, Wolfe. Every editor in town wants to know how you cracked this circus. The DA's crowing about his airtight case, and the commissioner's acting like he orchestrated the whole thing himself. Meanwhile, I get to mop up the press conferences." Wolfe didn't open his eyes. He sat with his hands folded on his middle, the picture of indifference. "You exaggerate. The facts were evident. You required only diligence." Kramer's mustache bristled. "Diligence, hell. You sit in your chair while Goodwin here traipses across town stirring the pot. Don't get me wrong, Archie. You did good work, but this—" He jabbed a thumb toward Wolfe. "He makes it look like magic." I shrugged. "I'm not saying he doesn't have a trick or two up his sleeve, but the truth is, Kramer, Wolfe doesn't need magic. He's got me." Kramer snorted, but I saw the corner of his mouth twitch. He wasn't about to hand Wolfe satisfaction, but he wasn't about to leave without venting either. "Just keep your noses out of my kitchen. The circle of gastronomy's a mess, and I don't need you two stirring sauces for the papers." He grabbed his hat and stomped out. After the door closed, Wolfe sighed, long and theatrical. Kramer is a blunt instrument, useful, but incapable of subtlety. "Maybe," I said, "but he's not wrong. The circle's still in shambles. Agnes is clinging by her fingernails, Vera's spinning it as triumph, and Kel's still telling every reporter he saved the night. You'd think we'd rescued them from drowning, but instead they're arguing over who owned the lifeboat." "Pfui." Wolfe reached for his beer. "Vanity is impervious to rescue." That might have been the end of it, but a day later a letter arrived by hand. Agnes Vale again, this time on simpler stationery. The words were measured. "We are grateful for your intervention. The Circle intends to issue a statement exonerating your household from any association with the scandal. We also invite you, discreetly, to advise us on future affairs." Wolfe read it twice, then set it aside. "Archie, draft a reply. Decline. I will not tether myself to their vanity. This house is sanctuary, not society." I did as told, but I admit I softened the edges. No point in burning bridges when you can leave them smoldering. That evening, Fritz brought dinner. Braised short ribs with a sauce so rich I suspected he'd raided the treasury for it. Wolfe ate with the solemnity of a priest, then leaned back, eyes closed. Archie, men confound themselves with flavors, but they forget the essence. Food sustains, not glorifies. When appetite becomes theater, truth is lost. Dorn's folly was not poison alone. It was presumption. I let him pontificate, because when Wolfe waxes philosophical after a good meal, there's no stopping him. Sure, I said, but if people stopped making fools of themselves, we'd be out of work. He cracked an eyelid at me. That, Archie, is the only dependable occupation in this city, cataloguing folly. The next morning, Vera Delaney herself arrived in a plume of perfume and indignation. She swept into the office as though she owned the place, chin high, voice sharp. Mr. Wolfe, the Circle requires your assurance that the Monarch pepper has been cleared of suspicion. If the papers continue to connect it with scandal, our suppliers will withdraw. Wolfe didn't move. The pepper is innocent. Men are not. If you lack the wit to distinguish, then your suppliers deserve their panic. She drew back, affronted. You will issue a statement, then? No. I bit my lip to keep from laughing. Wolfe's refusal was so clean it might as well have been carved from marble. Vera tried again, fluttering words about reputation and obligation, but Wolfe silenced her with a grunt. Finally, she turned on her heel and stormed out, leaving the scent of lilacs and defeat behind. When the door closed, I whistled. You just made another enemy. Phooey. She was never a friend. As if to counterbalance that storm, later in the week, Mila Petrov stopped by again. She was calmer this time, less tentative. I have work now, she said simply. They let me cook my own dishes. Small kitchen, but honest. Thank you. Wolfe inclined his head, which for him was equivalent to a bow of honor. Honesty is its own seasoning, he said. Mila smiled faintly and left. No perfume, no dramatics. Just quiet gratitude. It was a reminder that not everyone circling the kitchen was a vulture. Some were just trying to survive. By the week's end, the brownstone had resumed its rhythm. The orchids upstairs drank their mist, the kitchen hummed with Fritz's command, and Wolfe anchored the office like a mountain. The spice jar remained on his desk, sealed, a relic and a warning. He wouldn't let me toss it, and I didn't press the point. Wolfe liked his trophies, especially the ones that reminded him of human folly. One night, as I closed the ledger and turned off the lamp, Wolfe spoke from the darkness. His voice was steady, deliberate. Archie, the fatal flavor was not in the pepper nor in the sauce. It was in ambition, excessive, untempered. Men die of their own appetites long before they die of poison. I paused at the door. Maybe so. But in this town, boss, if ambition kills you, at least you die well-fed. Wolfe's eyes glimmered, then shut again. Satisfactory, he murmured. And that was the end of it. Another storm weathered, another trespass cleansed. Outside, New York chased its hungers through the night. Inside, the brownstone kept its sanctity, guarded by an immovable man, and the wisecracks of the fellow who fetched the truth for him. By the time Section 11 rolled around, the city had moved on to fresher scandals. The Circle of Gastronomy's fiasco had been reduced to a column or two on page 6, while aldermen and boxers once again hogged the headlines. But inside the brownstone, the echo of the affair was still present, like the faint scent of spice that lingers even after the pan's been scrubbed. Wolfe might have declared the house restored, yet his manner betrayed the quiet satisfaction of a man who had rearranged the world into its proper order. For him, the work was done. For me, it was clean-up duty. And as usual, clean-up meant sorting through both the phone calls and the debris left in people's hearts. Fritz was the first to recover. He reclaimed his kitchen with a zeal that bordered on martial. For 3 days, he refused to use pepper of any kind, black, white, or cayenne, as if exorcising demons by omission. Then, with a flourish only Fritz could muster, he unveiled a steak au poivre that had me licking my fingers and Wolfe pronouncing it adequate, which, in Fritz's language, was practically sainthood. I told him the ban had lasted longer than I expected. He sniffed, muttered about purity, and sent me to fetch more cream. Meanwhile, Agnes Vale was waging her own war. She called twice a day, alternating between gratitude and worry. 1 minute she was thanking Wolfe for saving the circle from annihilation. The next, she was lamenting the donors she'd lost, the reputations she couldn't save, and the dinners that would never be hosted again. Wolfe allowed me to handle the calls, muttering only once, "She must learn that prestige is not nourishment." I didn't repeat that to her. Some truths you feed gently. Vera Delaney tried a different tactic. She published a full-page piece in the society pages about her unforgettable gala, managing to turn near poison into PR. The woman had more gall than gallantry, and though Wolfe dismissed her as a pustule, I couldn't help but admire her survival instincts. In New York, survival often looks like vanity with a better tailor. Bruno Kell, for his part, hadn't shut up. He'd rebranded himself as the chef who stood strong against sabotage, claiming his genius had prevented catastrophe. Reporters ate it up. Wolfe ignored him entirely, which in his book was the cruelest cut of all. The only voice that mattered to Wolfe came from Rafik Haddad. A short letter, written in impeccable hand, arrived one morning. It expressed sorrow, gratitude, and a promise to rebuild his son with stricter discipline. Wolfe read it twice, folded it carefully, and tucked it into his drawer. He said nothing, but I caught the flicker in his eye. A rare respect for a man who shouldered his shame without parading it. Mila Petrov was the last loose end. She stopped by once more, shy as ever, to tell me she had secured permanent work at the Soho Bistro. "They let me design a dish," she said, eyes glowing. "Nothing fancy, but it is mine." Wolfe inclined his head gravely. "Guard it well. Food, like truth, is too often stolen." She nodded as if he had handed her a recipe for survival, and left. Through it all, the spice jar remained on Wolfe's desk. Blue glass, sealed, silent. More than once I reached for it, tempted to box it up and shove it in storage, but Wolfe insisted it remain visible. "A reminder," he said. "Men spoil their palate with ambition more readily than with salt." I didn't argue. He had a point, though staring at that jar gave me the creeps. It was like keeping a rattlesnake in a candy dish. One evening, when the week had quieted, Wolfe gathered his orchids as usual, then joined us for dinner. Veal this time, tender and precise. Midway through, he set down his fork, leaned back, and allowed himself a pronouncement. "Archie," he said, "this affair illustrates a principle. Appetite unrestrained is indistinguishable from poison. Dawn hungered for recognition, Vale for prestige, Vera for spectacle, Kell for applause. Each poisoned themselves long before they sought to poison others. I dabbed my mouth with a napkin. And what about Price? He just wanted to sneer. Pfui. Sneering is a symptom of starvation. I let that one go. Wolfe was in sermon mode, and you don't interrupt the liturgy. He took a sip of beer, eyes half shut. This house must remain inviolate. Its sanctity depends not on locks or bolts, but on vigilance. Remember that, Archie. Trespass will come again. It always does. He meant it as a caution, but I heard it as prophecy. Wolfe didn't need a crystal ball to know the world would find its way back to our door. It always had, always would, and when it did, he'd sit immovable, dismantling deceit with words sharper than any knife, while I did the running and fetching. That was our arrangement. That was the brownstone. Later, as I finished my notes, I caught myself staring once more at the spice jar. Wolfe had declared the case concluded, but something about that crown scroll still bothered me. Was it Dorn's flourish, or someone else's hand guiding his? Wolfe might not care to pursue ghosts, but me. I couldn't shake the itch. I closed the drawer, switched off the lamp, and glanced at Wolfe. He was already dozing, chin sunk, satisfied. The city roared outside, chasing hungers that never slept. Inside, we'd restored balance for now. The truth is, Wolfe was right. The fatal flavor wasn't pepper, wasn't spice, wasn't sauce. It was ambition, greed, and vanity, ground together until they stank, and no amount of seasoning could disguise it. I turned off the light, and as the office sank into shadow, I muttered my own conclusion. Funny thing about ambition, it doesn't just kill the appetite, it cooks the whole meal. Wolfe snored in reply, which in his language meant agreement. And so the brownstone slept again, inviolate for the moment, waiting for the next knock on the door. The brownstone had slipped back into its steady rhythm, but if you've lived there as long as I have, you know rhythm doesn't mean silence. It means Wolfe filling the air with pronouncements between bites of Fritz's duck, or orchids drawing his attention while the city scrambles to find new ways of making fools of itself. After the fireworks of the case, the days that followed felt like the settling of dust after a storm. Yet that dust never really vanishes. It clings, subtle but stubborn, reminding you what blew through. Kramer kept sniffing around like a bulldog denied his bone. He dropped by again, uninvited, pacing the office with a cigar clamped in his teeth. "We've got Dorn nailed," he said, waving his hand as though the whole courthouse rested on his palm. "But I'll be damned if I can figure why he went so far, so fast. Poison at a gala, what was he aiming for? Publicity? Revenge? Or was he just cracked?" Wolfe listened, eyes half-lidded, beer in hand. Motives are rarely singular, Inspector. They ferment. Dorn craved recognition, feared irrelevance, and found vanity as intoxicating as wine. That combination is lethal. "Lethal, sure," Kramer grumbled. "But I'd sleep easier if I thought he hadn't had help." "Then you will never sleep," Wolfe replied, setting his glass down. "Human folly is communal. Even when one man stirs the pot, many provide the ingredients." That earned Wolfe a glare, but Kramer knew better than to push. He stomped out, muttering about philosophers in armchairs. When the door closed, I smirked. "You enjoy needling him." "I instruct him," Wolfe corrected. "Whether he learns is his affair." The circle of gastronomy, meanwhile, was licking its wounds in public. The papers carried reports of Agnes Vale announcing reforms and renewed dedication to integrity. Wolfe dismissed it with a grunt. The circle seeks survival, not integrity. I didn't argue. Agnes was trying to rebuild with spit and string, and maybe that was enough. People have survived on less. Vera Delaney tried once more to salvage her pride, sending us an invitation to another event. Something about a celebration of resilience. Wolfe didn't even let me finish reading it aloud before saying, "Decline." His voice carried the finality of a gavel. I didn't bother drafting a polite refusal. Sometimes silence is the loudest answer. What surprised me most was Bruno Kell's quiet. After weeks of chest-thumping, he vanished from the gossip columns. I figured he was either licking his wounds or preparing his next performance. Either way, Wolfe showed no concern. "A man who feeds on applause cannot starve himself for long," he said. "He will resurface, noisier and no wiser." Mila Petrov's story, though, didn't end in silence. She stopped by once more, carrying a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. She handed it to Fritz, who brought it into the office as though it were the crown jewels. Inside was a jar of pickled vegetables, her own recipe, she explained in a note written with careful strokes. "For the house that listened." Wolfe sniffed it, tasted one bite, and pronounced it honest. That single word from him carried more weight than any medal. Through it all, the jar remained on Wolfe's desk, blue glass, sealed, untouched. I had grown used to its presence, though every time the light hit it just so, it gleamed like a warning. Wolfe never spoke of discarding it. When I asked once, he fixed me with that heavy gaze. It remains as memory. Memory is safeguard. That was that. One evening, near the close of the week, Wolfe gathered us in the dining room. Fritz, myself, and even Theodore from the Orchids, who looked bewildered at being summoned downstairs. Dinner was immaculate. Squab roasted in butter, with Fritz's sauce so rich it felt like sin. Wolfe ate slowly, methodically, then leaned back, hands folded. "This house has endured trespass," he said, voice carrying the same weight it had the night of the gathering. "It has been cleansed, but not without scar. Let us remember, our sanctuary is not preserved by walls alone, but by vigilance, discipline, and truth." Theodore nodded solemnly. Fritz bowed his head as if receiving benediction, and I raised my glass. "Here's to the brownstone," I said, still standing. Wolfe gave a short grunt, still inviolate. After dinner, back in the office, I found myself staring at the jar again. I asked him, "Do you ever worry it'll happen again? Someone else walking in here, trying to use our house as their stage?" His eyes closed, his voice calm. "It will happen, inevitably. As long as men crave crowns, they will trespass, and as long as I remain, they will be exposed." There was no bravado in it, no flourish, just fact. Wolfe knew his role in this world, immovable and unyielding. I turned off the lamp, leaving him dozing in the chair, the jar glowing faintly in the half-light. Outside, the city howled with its appetites, chasing scandals like a dog after bones. Inside, the brownstone held its sanctity, fragile, battered, but unbroken. And me? I filed my notes, locked the drawer, and let the thought settle. The fatal flavor was never in the pepper, never in the sauce. It was in the ambition that tried to season truth itself. Wolfe had named it, I had seen it, and together we had bottled it, for now. As I headed upstairs, I muttered, "Funny thing about ambition, it spoils faster than milk." Wolfe, half asleep, rumbled a reply. So it must be discarded. Always. And with that, the case was done. The brownstone was quiet again, the kind of quiet you only notice after a storm. Fritz moved through the kitchen with his usual serenity. The orchids upstairs basked in Theodore's care, and Wolfe sat rooted in his chair, as immovable as the granite cliffs of Maine. To the untrained eye, nothing had changed. But to those who'd lived through the past weeks, the poisoned sauce, the suspects, the circle's collapse, everything had shifted, just enough to remind us that even sanctuaries could be breached. Dawn's trial was still weeks away, but the law would take its course. Agnes Vale would go on presiding, scarred but wiser. Rafiq Haddad had reclaimed his honor at the cost of his son's exile. Vera Delaney had already found a new stage, and Bruno Kell was busy polishing his reflection. Mila Petrov had carved out a kitchen of her own, proof that honesty sometimes slips through the cracks of this city. The circle of gastronomy might stagger on, but it would never quite regain its sheen. What mattered, though, wasn't the circle. It was the brownstone. Wolfe had reminded everyone, including me, that our true business wasn't chasing spices or exposing scandals for sport. It was preserving the sanctity of this house, the orchids, the meals, the discipline of order. And though trespass had rattled the walls, order had been restored. That evening, Wolfe leaned back after dinner, folded his hands, and let his voice settle heavy across the room. "Archie, men poison themselves not with arsenic, but with ambition. Spice and sauce are innocent. It is appetite unrestrained that corrodes. This house must remain inviolate against such contagion." I nodded, because when Wolfe spoke like that, there wasn't room for contradiction. He was right. The jar on his desk wasn't just evidence, it was warning, a reminder that flavor could kill when mixed with vanity. He closed his eyes, signaling the end of the sermon. I switched off the lamp, the room sinking into shadow. For a moment, the brownstone felt like a fortress, safe and whole again. As I reached the door, I couldn't help tossing over my shoulder. Sure, boss. But if ambition's the real poison, this city's already on the menu. Wolfe grunted, which, in his language, meant agreement. And with that, the case of the fatal flavor mystery was closed, filed away in Wolfe's vast mind, noted in my ledger, and left to settle into the city's endless stew of folly. Outside, appetite still roared, but inside, the brownstone held fast.